Hey everybody, it's Mike. Welcome back to the Z Motorsports Shopping Channel. This video we're going to be removing and installing the turbocharger on our 2006 Silverado Duramax. This is the LBZ, but I think it's pretty much going to be the same across the board with maybe a few little idiosyncrasies in there. Anyway, this is not going to be a complete step-by-step, just because the tight quarters and everything. I think it's going to be hard to get a camera down in there, but I would like to give you an overview as I'm going through it. And then when it comes time to the rebuild, I'm going to make a separate video of just the rebuild, and I will put a link of that in the description if you just want to watch the rebuild portion. So anyway, stay tuned. Let's go ahead and rip this thing apart and rebuild the turbocharger. So coolant's drained. I just popped the radiator hose loose there. I got the inner fender out. Downpipes broke loose from the the pipe is broke loose from the downpipe. I've got the up pipes, fasteners, all soaked with Croil overnight. Now we're going to move up the top side and start getting everything ready so we can pull heat shields and glow plug relay and everything. The serpentine belt slipped off, the air compressor is unbolted. I'm leaning over on the passenger fender well. I have the mouthpiece off, plus the intake over to the air box. I removed the boot for the hot pipe coming off the turbo and stuffed a rag in it so I can hold it out of the way. I've just removed the turbo vane position sensor. I can show the socket that I actually machined years ago for removing those, but I wanted to show another little trick for removing this style of connector, these little Christmas tree barbs. This is on the sensor itself, and this mounts down underneath this. Your bail connector is down over here on the driver's side, and it can be kind of problematic to get those out. A lot of people will just stick a screwdriver back in behind and pry them out. Well, generally what that does is it folds those little barbs. See if I can do that. I'm trying to hold the camera. It folds those little barbs back around on themselves and basically ruins the connectors. But if you take, I just take a long-handled ratchet with a 1/4 inch, and it'll vary from connector or from Christmas tree barb to Christmas tree barb, but I just take a 1/4 inch. This particular one, take a 1/4 inch socket. And as it protrudes through the bracket, I'm sorry, I'm trying to do too many things with here. If you put the socket on it and push, it collapses the trees, and then you just put a pick or I just use one of these cotter pin tools like this down in behind it and pull, and it pops the one out. And as it does that, it also pops your socket off the connector. Then you just go to the next one, push it on, and pop it out, and it comes right out. That way you don't damage these little barbs. And then, like on the one over here, I did the same thing. I put the socket underneath and pushed up, and actually as I was pushing it on, it actually pushed the barb right up out of the hole. So anyway, quick little trick, that way you don't damage those barbs. And I'll just, now I'm going to start working on getting the heat shields off the back of the turbo and moving the glow plug relay out of the way over here. So I can get this all these fasteners on the back of the turbo and the up pipes soaked down with some Croil and let it soak overnight. Before I forget, this is just a 1 inch, and it's nothing. I just grabbed I think this is a Carlisle from my local Napa. Yeah, I just grabbed a 1 inch deep chrome socket, and you want to get one that has the flanks that go all the way up inside. And I just chucked it up laid it down in the mill, and I cut a 1/4 inch. I milled a 1/4 inch groove down through it, so that way it just simply slides over the sensor like so, and you just put a 1/2 inch ratchet on it, takes it right out, and you don't end up damaging the flats on the sensor. I know they say a wrench will fit in there, but I haven't had the greatest luck with wrenches. Got the heat shield off the back of the downpipe. Got the downpipe loose. I'm not going to lie, those two were a bit of a bear to get out. I was able to reach 2 of the heat shield bolts from the top side, reaching down over the back of the turbo. The other one I was able to get down low. The band clamp come loose pretty easily. The one at the front pipe on the exhaust system come loose real easy, but I've got a bank system on it that I put on probably, I don't know, well, 60,000 miles, 55,000 miles ago, so that come off relatively easy. The one in the back of the turbo, I had to walk the downpipe out to get it out of the spigot on the back of the turbo, but it took a little bit coming out. On the inside, doesn't look bad at all. It doesn't not a lot of build up, but it was such a tight fit and around that flange. The clamp popped right off. It's just the it wouldn't come out of the turbo. So now that I got that done, I progressed on. I'd soaked all the fasteners down with Croil overnight. Croil worked its magic. So there's 3 fasteners on the right up pipe on the back of the turbo. Then you've got 2 on the back of the EGR. If you've done an EGR delete, you won't have those. And then you've got 3 fasteners right here. And these are all 12 point. So I've got these last couple here broke loose. So I'll go ahead and, I thought I had them broke loose. Maybe not, they all come out pretty easily. Yep, Croil definitely worked its magic. Yeah, that was the only one that was a little snug coming out. Gasket off, fastener out. Okay, I'll go ahead and snake that down out of there. Right up pipe down, and it just kind of took a little bit of, if you have an EGR delete and you've got the different up pipe on it, or you've got this capped off, it'll come out easy. You had to kind of get the angle of the dangle just right to get this down past the studs and then work it out over the frame, but it came out. So that's what you should be looking at now, with basically just the 3 bolts on the back of the driver's side turbo flange, and then rest you should be able to get from the top side and pull the turbo out. Oh, and there's the dipstick that I loosened the 2 nuts and lifted the dipstick tube. There's a bracket up off of them and slid it back, which that's necessary to allow enough void in here to pull those shields out mainly, and the up pipe. At this point, like I said, the right side up pipe is out. There's 3 bolts. Just like on the right side, there's 3 bolts on the left side. You do have to take that heat shield loose. I was able to do that from the top side and just push it back out of the way. And then I did have to loosen this little tab by where the transfer case breather goes. I did that just because I couldn't get, there's a top bell housing bolt right here, and there's a bracket, or a tab rather, for the heat shield on the driver's side up pipe, and it's very tight between the 2, so I had to use a little bit of an extension, and then my ratchet was hitting this little bracket. So it's a 13mm nut. Just back it off a little bit. I didn't take it all the way off. I just backed it off till it was flush at the end of the stud, pushed it back, and then I was able to get my ratchet on there and break them loose. So again, Croil to the rescue. Not a single broken bolt on any of the 9 fasteners for the 2 up pipes that you have to take loose, and the 2 on the back of the EGR manifold there. So I think we're done down here. We'll lower the truck back down and climb up top, and I think I've just got the pedestal bolts, an oil line, oil drain cooler, and I think a coolant hose is all that's remaining. So the turbo is ready to lift out. I probably went a couple steps further than most people do. It's not that big of a deal though. The oil drain line, I don't know if you can see it, it's back here, fits onto 2 studs sticking up from the block at the back, right about where the bell housing mounts. What I've seen a lot of people do on the internet is loosen remove the 3 screws that hold the driver's side up pipe to the back of the turbo, and it has a vibration bellows on it, but they take a pry bar and jack that up pipe around to where they can get that drain pipe up off the studs. Yes, that is possible, but I don't like jacking those freaking vibration bellows around any more than you absolutely have to on those up pipes. So it's not that big a deal. Right above your oil filter, you can reach it from the bottom. You've got to take your heat shield off really anyway to get to the top bolts. So just go ahead and take the 3 bolts out at the bottom, remove. And like I say, I've just I didn't even pull the whole up pipe out. It's just kind of tucked off to the side there. Then that allows that drain pipe to come straight up off of those 2 studs. What's better is going back together. I'm assuming, because I haven't put this back together yet, but as I'm going through this, I'm thinking the process about going back together. And yeah, I probably could have just grabbed the turbo and yanked it out from underneath that up pipe, but going back together, you're going to have a gasket and everything sitting down on there, and trying not to tweak and bend and flex that drain pipe. This way it should, again, in theory, I haven't done this yet, but it should sit right back down on, and then the up pipe can be bolted back on, which resides slightly over the top of that drain pipe. Also, the oil feed line goes right here on top of the turbo. You undo it and get it out of the way. Once you get the turbo up so far, it kind of gets hung up on the hydraulic solenoid for the turbo vanes, for the unison ring. It's not that big of a deal to just go ahead. There's one more fitting down below, undo it, pull the whole oil feed line right up and out of the way. Now it allows you free, unobstructed access to pull this out. And then when you go back together, my thinking is I'll get it back into this point, and I still have access down underneath. So then I will bolt the oil line in with a new seal, and then set the turbo back down in, and then I can hook it all back up. So as I'm pulling this apart, I'm not just thinking about getting it out and getting it apart. I'm thinking about the reverse process and how to make that go smoothly and easily as well. So like I said, I just variated a little bit. A lot of people, well, from what I see, most people do not remove that left up pipe, but it's not that big a deal. It's 3 bolts. And as long as you get them soaked down good, I soaked these with Croil. Well, this is 2 nights now they've been soaked, and I didn't break a single bolt. They all come out. They're tight. I'm not gonna lie, they're tight, but they come out with a little bit of persuasion. Well, here's the rebuild kit that I went with. It's a KC Turbo, but it's pretty much the same one that everybody else is selling out there. It's got the 360-degree thrust washer, thrust plate, not just the 270. And then new bearings and fasteners and everything. I also ordered the stainless steel unison ring, although my unison ring wasn't too bad a shape. So here's all the parts cleaned up. The cover for the gear set, and the plunger, all the vanes are cleaned up. They cleaned up really well. They weren't too awfully bad, actually. The turbine housing, I've run a Scotch-Brite around the inside, and I've also test fitted the downpipe to make sure it fits in nice and smooth and easy, so I don't have to fight with it once this is back in the truck. I run a thread chaser through all the bolt holes, cleaned everything up there on the for the downpipes. For the inside here, I come in with a small Scotch-Brite on a roll-lock disc and polished up all these surfaces. I run some emery paper around all the pins so they spin nice and freely. Again, new polished stainless, or not polished, just stainless steel unison ring. I also come in, I pulled the gear set apart, but a lot of people don't pull that out. My theory is you're this far down, that's the last component, why not pull it out and clean it up? So I drove the roll pin out, pulled the gear off, pulled it out, cleaned it, put some Moly lube on, back in, put a new spiral wound roll pin back in it. And then I come in and clearance, or actually before I put that bit together, I clearanced everything around here. I took a rotary bit, a fine-tooth one, and stood it up and went around the diameter of this. And then I took a roll-lock disc on this flat surface, and basically I added a little bit of clearance so the unison ring spins freely and will not gum up again. I'm really disappointed. I would have thought that, I get this is a casting, but I would have thought they would have chucked this on a rotary table or some kind of CNC mill and come in and machined this surface. It was just rough casting, and it was very snug, which is why it didn't allow much expansion of that center section before it binds on and locks up that unison ring. So anyway, that's how that is going to function once it's all back together. Let's see, the compressor housing is all cleaned up inside and out, and everything's pretty much ready to go back together here. Turbo all rebuilt, ready to go back in the engine bay. Been putting some oil down in it the last night or so while I've been working on other things to make sure we have everything lubed good, and then I'll dump some oil in it before we fire it and prime it. Actually, not already prime it, just dump some oil down in through it before we fire it up. Here's all my new ARP fasteners for the up pipes to the turbo from the manifolds. There's all the gaskets, the fuel seal and banjo bolt for the top of the turbo, the pedestal bolts, and the 2 bolts for the oil drain line that are ready to go on. Coming over here to the truck, the engine bay is all prepped and ready to accept the turbo. I've got the heat shield cleaned and reinstalled down there. The boss for the the oil pressure line cleaned and ready to go. New coolant hose here, the 90 coming off the port there on the for the coolant. The new gasket, the surface plate back there in the flywheel housing for the oil drain line. The surface area is cleaned, prepped, new gasket installed. As you can see with that left driver's side up pipe removed and out of the way, there should be a clear shot with that drain line going back onto those studs. I know some people don't pull that that up pipe. I don't know, I didn't want to fight it. I didn't want to damage the tube nor the expansion joint on the up pipe. So I just 3 more bolts and it was out. Wasn't that big of a deal. You can reach right up above the oil filter and they're right there. So for me it was a no-brainer. Anyway, so turbo's ready to go, be set back in place, and then I'll start bolting the turbo and everything in, getting the coolant lines and oil lines and everything done up here, and then we'll move down to the bottom and start connecting up pipes. All right, so here's just a couple of things that I would like to think kind of make my work stand out a little bit compared to others, and that is things that I do that don't necessarily aren't required, but sure make the job progress a little better, and that is things like running a thread chaser through all the exhaust manifold bolts. Now that the turbo's back in the engine bay and secured, you want to make sure you do not forget the oil drain line nuts back here. Those get torqued to 18 foot-pounds, and it is a tight fit to get a torque wrench up in there. Preferably if you've got one, like mine's got a fairly, it's fine tooth, so you got a fairly short throw. It's still tight getting a torque wrench up in there, but torque those nuts properly. I suggest doing that as soon as the turbo is sitting down in the engine bay so you don't forget. And then I went through and run a thread chaser through all of the exhaust manifold bolt holes, so that when the up pipes go back from the manifold back up to the turbo, that the fasteners will easily screw into the holes. And you're not trying to, because you're already trying to fight holding a gasket in there. You don't want to fight trying to start a fastener as well. I did have to drop my strut. I've got a 6-inch RDS lift, RCD lift on my truck, and so I did lower and swing the strut bar back to allow me enough access up above the oil filter for the driver's side up pipe. So those threads are all chased, and that's ready to go back together now. And coming over here, another thing that I went ahead and did was I removed my battery trays. They were starting to show a little corrosion, especially like right in through here. So they were removed, put in the blasting cabinet, glass bead prepped, and then everything, and I probably brushed a good heavy coat of Pour 15 over them on both sides all around. So those are all prepped and ready to be reinstalled. The bolt holes, or excuse me, the bolts with the large fender washers on all of them, all those were bead blasted and painted as well, so they're all ready to go back in. My passenger up pipe, the downpipe, everything's ready to go back in. I also bought new batteries. My other batteries were getting some age on them, so as it's going back together, where it's middle of winter here, I wanted to make sure I wasn't left stranded anywhere, so they got new Napa Legend batteries going back in it. So let's start putting the up pipes back together. Chasing those threads may be a little time consuming, but the fact that you can put a fastener in and spin it in with your fingers all the way into where the pipe is snug speaks volumes. So it's worth the, I don't know what I spent, probably, I bet it wasn't quick. I bet it was half an hour chasing all these. The passenger side wasn't bad because it's right here in the open fender well, but driver's side was a little more problematic. I could only go, I don't know, 30-degree swing on the tool at a time. But anyway, there's the driver's side up pipe. All 3 fasteners in, gasket, and it's ready to snug up and torque in a matter of minutes versus fighting trying to get the bolts to start. Driver's side left up pipe torqued in place. Fasteners get torqued to 39 foot-pounds. I also advise, sorry about that, taking a mirror when you get the fasteners started. Take a mirror, stick up in there, and make certain that the gasket is fully engaged with the fastener. I've gotten vehicles in my shop here before where somebody else had worked on them, and I've found where the gaskets have slipped out and the bolts still went in. So just, it's much easier to double check, because those, especially on these ones where they're up at an angle, if you miss a hole, a bolt, that gasket will swing down out of the way. Not so much on the second one, on the passenger one, when the driver's side one's already in place, because it can't swing very far. You'll just have a hard time lining the fastener up. But on the driver's side one, when you're putting it together without the passenger one in place, that gasket can swing down out of the way. So just take a mirror, make sure that you have an even distance sticking out all the way around. And then here's how simple, once you chase the threads on these, here's how easily these fasteners just thread in. So again, it takes a little bit of time, but I highly recommend chasing the threads on these. And then I just put some nickel anti-seize on them and threading them in, and these will all get torqued to 39 foot-pounds. So heat shield is in place. I just have to push the dipstick tube back down in and tighten the 2 nuts on the dipstick, and then secure the intermediate pipe, I think they call it, up here to the downpipe. So I recommend kind of leaving the clamp, get the downpipe into the back of the turbo. I put just a little bit of anti-seize around that flange where it slips into the back of the turbo. But when you get that in there, put your clamp on and everything, and I actually snugged mine down to make sure it's seated, and then I backed it off just a little bit, so I've got a little bit of movement here in just a little bit of movement here in this downpipe where it meets the intermediate pipe. That way you can put your clamp on and tighten everything together. Then I'll go back up top side and tighten the band clamp, the V-clamp on the back of the turbo. All right, so the bottom end is done down here. One thing I like to do once I put all the heat shields and everything back on anything for this matter, because a lot of times when you're pulling them out, you're tweaking them and twisting them a little bit, and it's just thin sheet metal. So when I'm putting things back, heat shields in particular, back together, because they have a nasty little rattle, I'll just go through and start tapping on them and making sure that it's not touching anything rigid and source of a rattle. I've taken a little bit extra time here. I've cleaned all my trays and everything where the air box goes. I've bead blasted, repainted the battery trays, both of them here, and pretty much just about button things up here. So I've got the bracket mounted back to the cylinder head, and then the glow plug relay resecured, the connector back together, the fuel line resecured and tightened, the turbo hydraulic, or excuse me, the oil feed line I've left loose temporarily just because I've been putting oil down in it and turning the impeller just a little bit as I'm working, so I can make sure that I've got plenty of oil down in there. Let's see. Oh, heat shield. So please put the heat shields back in. It's all over. I mean, I think that's a rarity to see people put the heat shields back in. You'll see people say, oh, I don't need it. I haven't noticed any adverse effects of heat under my hood or one thing or another. The heat shields are there for more than just under hood heat. A turbo works more efficiently when it has heat to spin the turbine. So by keeping the heat shield there, your turbo is actually operating more efficiently and the way it was designed, rather than just worrying about underhood heat. Yes, that is part of it, but just put your heat shields back in. I took and cut this one, welded some little tabs, and made it to where I can fasten it back in. But it looks OEM, other than you can see these two little tabs that I've welded, and instead of having 3 screws or 3 fasteners holding the shield down to the turbo, I've got 5. So it was a little bit more work, yes, but it gives it the OE appearance. It looks like you give a shit when you're putting it back together, and it's just, the heat shields are there for a reason. So just do yourself a favor, put the heat shields back in. I do have to fix, I broke my line for my boost gauge here coming off of the bung for the hot pipe, but I want to test my intercooler system before I get too carried away, so I'll fix that about that time. Let's see. Oh, also while I'm here, I've got new thermostats, so I'm going to be changing the thermostats on it as it's going back together. And then I want to pull a vacuum and make sure I don't have, where I replace these couple of coolant lines going to the turbo, I want to make sure I do not have any coolant leaks before I put the mouthpiece and everything on. So that's probably going to be the next step I do, is replace the T-stats and pull a vacuum on the cooling system and make sure everything's good there. And then basically just button things up here, put some coolant in it, and she should be ready to fire. So continuing on, the PCV hoses are connected. I have a reroute, so I have a T going in the line from the one that goes from bank to bank. So that's in place. The bell connectors are reconnected and bolted in. While I was here, I went ahead and, while the compressor and everything was out of the way, I went ahead and unbolted the thermostat housing right here, lifted it up, changed both thermostats. It's been quite a while since I did that. Torqued it back in place, reconnected everything over here by the bell connectors, where I undid to raise this inlet, or this coolant connect tube up out of the way. Once I got the cooling system sealed, or down back and sealed, before I put the mouthpiece and everything back in, I went ahead and pulled a vacuum on the cooling system, and it's holding about just shy of 25 inches of vacuum. So I pulled a vacuum on it to make sure the coolant hoses on the turbo, as well as the thermostat housing and the lower radiator hose that I disturbed. We're all holding while I had access here. That's been holding for about a half an hour now. So the cooling system's tight. While I'm waiting, or while I was buttoning things up here, I went ahead and put the compressor back in place, put the serpentine belt on. I think I'm going to go ahead and put the upper radiator shroud in place and get the TCM and everything remounted back over here. And then I'm going to fill it with coolant. And then before I connect my hot pipe, I'm going to go ahead and hook my Kentmore tester up and test it, make sure I don't have any leaks on the intercooler system. I have my boost gauge line right here broke. I need to fix that real quick. And then I can pretty much button this up, put batteries in it, and fire it up. As a finishing touch, I always like to hook my boost, or my intercooler boost pressure gauge up. So I run it up to about 10, see if it holds. It'll drop a little bit, about a pound a second. It's about normal. So you can see that gauge, it's dropping off. Yeah, maybe a pound a second or a little less. So that's a good tight system. If it's holding there, I'll run it up to about 20. Hold it there. Check everything over. I turn the radio off, I turn the fans off, I turn everything off so I can listen. And it's just a nice steady drop, so I don't hear any hissing. So good tight system. So I'll go ahead and disconnect it, hook the hot pipe up to the turbo, and this thing's just about ready to fire. Okay, she's ready to fire. So I've double checked everything. I put some more oil down the line. That's the last thing I hooked up, the feed line to the turbo. I just put the new sealing washer or seal on there and torqued that banjo bolt down. It was torqued down to 19 foot-pounds. Well, she's all back together, purring like a kitten. That job's done. So if this was informative, give me a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments if you liked it or not. It was, like I said, it wasn't a step-by-step, just because it's kind of hard in tight quarters, hard to work with a camera down in there. But I tried to give a good overview of what's involved in removing and installing the turbo.